All right, everyone, welcome back into another NBA DFS video. We have a small 5-game slate here for you guys. Not too much injury news right now. It should be a good one. First, kind of quick recap of yesterday. We were both on pretty solid stuff, I would say. The Sengun and Fred VanVleet stack that we kind of had in the late night ended up working out, especially Sengun. A little risk reward there, but it seemed to work out.
Yeah, Sengun being in definitely worked out for us. I think he was only 1% owned in the $40 single entry on DK, which is like the one place I cashed because I had a lot of Jokic otherwise. And yeah, the ref show continues across the NBA. Got ejected for nothing once again, but it is what it is. I mean, that's the game we play.
Yeah, exactly. At least it wasn't like a late scratch or something instead.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's more tilting, but yeah, they're both brutal.
Yep. But yeah, looking at today's slate, it's just a 5-game slate. We don't really have too much news. I mean, LeBron questionable as always. I think that's just going to be the norm going forward. Like, is there anything you find really slate impacting right now? Obviously, Mitchell being out is probably the biggest one. Should we start there?
Yeah, I mean, Mitchell being out, and that kind of segues right into Karis LeVert's still questionable. If LeVert's out, I think that matters because tonight we have, I don't know if this is fact, but I've heard a few people saying the highest total game, according to Vegas, of all time between the Hawks and the Pacers. So I'm really looking to jam in Trey with Halliburton as much as I can. But on FanDuel, they're no longer either have shooting guard eligibility, neither does Darius Garland. So you kind of have to pick 2 out of the 3. So as it stands right now, I'm definitely on Halliburton and Trey. But if LeVert's out, it's going to be tough to get away from Garland because, again, we already have Mitchell out of that lineup as well. The other thing, too, is Max Strus becomes very appealing with LeVert out of the lineup as well. And Mobley sees a boost, too. So not a great matchup for Cleveland, certainly. But they're already without their best player. And if LeVert's out as well, that's another guy who takes up a ton of usage.
I will say I'm a little bit surprised by kind of the minutes projection and then also just like the overall ownership for Craig Porter, who had the last 2 games and games that, you know, against Denver was a blowout as well. This game's projected to be 7.5. He had 25 minutes, had 2 straight good games in a row. I'm just a little bit shocked that no one's getting there at that cheap price tag in a slate where I didn't find too much value. Do you think that's too thin tonight as it sits right now?
I think it depends on LeVert. I think the reason we don't have more minutes for him is because we have LeVert in the model right now. If LeVert's ruled out, I do expect him to climb into being one of the better value plays. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on. As it stands, though, like you said, I mean, there's not much value. And we kind of ran into a situation last night where we're like, if Herder's out, don't play Duarte. I think a lot of people still play Duarte. This feels kind of similar. Like if LeVert is in, I don't know that we get those minutes that we need out of Porter. So I proceed with caution there. But if LeVert's out, I think he's a really solid value option.
So let's just talk about LeVert real quick as well. Like if he plays, he's just like a GPP only play, like, right? Like he's someone that can win you a GPP. He's also someone that can ruin your whole night, right? That's kind of our expectation for him still.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the game logs. This is obviously not a way to build lineups, but just to see the range of outcomes. I mean, he has a game with 17 fantasy points, with 45 fantasy points. He's all over the place. So that's typically a good GPP play, but not someone you could consistently trust. So I don't like the matchup with Philly. Again, we have some really high total games on the slate. This one's under 220. First game as well, pretty low total. We could still find pieces there, but where LeVert's kind of priced where he should be, I'm not all that interested unless we get Garland out as well. I mean, he's fine as like a last piece in, but again, I mean, I really want to hone in on that Indiana Hawks game as much as I can tonight personally.
Yeah, so typically we always do like the news part of this news and notes segment. This is definitely noteworthy. So let's just talk about that game in general. I have both games or both teams pulled up on the model. It is a 252 over and under, 4.5 point spread. When I was doing like a little bit of prop stuff earlier today, I was struggling because like none of the data liked their overs. And I like for Atlanta and Indy, like all the mid-tier guys like Bruce Brown, DeAndre Hunter, Mathurin, like all those like guys that on a nightly basis with everyone healthy, you probably are not looking at. My question to you is, do you see any of those kind of 4K, 5K players in play tonight? Because they all feel a little bit too thin. Like the only way I see myself getting there is if I'm truly going out on a game stack.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bogdan's a little bit overpriced, but we're seeing low ownership on him on both sides. I like him a lot as a tournament play. We see in these high-scoring games, he becomes very involved. I'm not going to talk about the expensive guys yet. I mean, Clint Capella's floating around 5,700 on DK, 6,2 on FanDuel. I think that's appealing. Hunter's tough for me. Bruce Brown is super chalky on FanDuel. I think the highest owned player over there. There have been slates
Yeah.
I tried to get away from that chalk multiple times this season, and it's burnt me. Then I'll play him, and he'll have a floor game. I will say Benedict Mathurin is a logical pivot. The ownership on him does seem to be climbing, though, but he's a guy on offense who should be heavily involved, kind of like the Pacers version of Bogdan, like wide range of outcomes, scoring dependent, but we have seen ceiling games out of him. For guys like Hunter, though, Sadiq Bey, I think they're a little bit more narrow in their upside,
Yeah.
but again, when you see a game with this total, I mean, sure, we want to get Halliburton and Trey. After that, I mean, other people are going to be scoring points too. It's not going to. They're both not scoring 50 real points here. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of pieces to like. I mean, Jalen Johnson is the guy we've all, like, at Occupy have liked all season, I feel like. If he's in the starting lineup again, I do imagine I get to him. But yeah, if I'm picking anything in that range, it's probably Bruce Brown, somewhat reluctantly in his ownership. I do like Mathurin as a tournament pivot. And then Obi Toppin doesn't feel good, but on a slate with not much value, I think he should have to play 25 to 30 minutes here, which should be enough for him. But yeah, I can't say I'm excited to play Obi Toppin in a game with the 252 point total.
No, I agree with that for sure. It's a crazy game because, yeah, like I mentioned, and you kind of touched on, it's like the only plays we really want to go out of our way to get are the top two studs, and then maybe Jalen Johnson. And that's what makes it difficult. And like Andika Ganku for Atlanta center wise, he's still very cheap on DraftKings. He's had a few bad games in a row. Maybe we could get to him in a higher scoring game, but also still feels probably a little too thin. I don't know. Like, it's interesting there. I did want to get your quick thoughts on Jordan Nwora, who finally got some minutes over in the last game. I think that was just a random thing. The coach wanted to spark. He was hitting some buckets. Is that basically what that is? I don't even think the model had him listed. Right? We probably can't.
Yeah, I mean, he played 23 minutes and he was ridiculous. I think like 1.4 fantasy points per minute. It's not sustainable, and he's not currently part of the rotation, but I mean, sometimes we see this. A guy will have a good game and suddenly they'll change minutes, and Carlisle's still the coach in Indiana, right? Like, he shuffles rotations as much as anyone. So I think there's a chance he's viable here, but it would take me a bunch of lineups to get to him. I don't think you could play him in low risk. Like, there's no guarantee he's even in the rotation necessarily. But yeah, I mean, if you want to take a shot, he does have upside. It's just you're taking a shot in the dark because those minutes certainly aren't locked in.
Yeah, I would say if we probably won't get this news, but if we were to get any news that indicates he's going to play, I probably would get on him. Like, I'd normally do 4 lineups. I'd probably play him 1 just because if he does get the minutes, he's going to shoot. But yeah, probably too thin. But I want to get that confirmation there. And then just other news items, like we'll go to Orlando real quick, just because we know that Carter and also Fultz are still out. And really, everyone seems to be correctly priced. I was liking Jonathan Isaac when he was below 4K. Now he's above 4K, probably too thin. Maybe Gary Harris, but he's also at 4K. And then possibly Joe Ingles for a value play, but his minutes aren't locked in. Is that kind of how you're feeling about Orlando?
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same. I will say Batadze is interesting as a value center. I mean, kind of inconsistent, the minutes for him. But Toronto, I mean, they're pretty big in the front court. I do think he's going to have to play some decent run here. We have seen ceiling games out of him. He's priced around the same as Capella. And I do imagine he's going to be much lower owned. So if there is a piece from Orlando in that kind of 5K range that I like, it's probably Goga. You bring up Jonathan Isaac, really great player. I mean, before he went down a couple seasons ago, he was an all-star. Still not seeing the minutes we want out of him. I think the cap for him has been around 20. Yeah. I think you could play him in tournaments even with the limited minutes and the price increase just because he is ridiculous in terms of fantasy point per minute, especially on FanDuel where you get the extra points for blocks, steals, etc. But again, boom-bust type play. Same with Ingles. I mean, Gary Harris is scoring dependent. All these guys I don't feel great about, but they do have upside. And the other issue with this game is it's the first one to lock on the slate. So if you're locking in risky value here, you're kind of handicapping yourself in that you're not going to be able to pivot if we do get late breaking news in some of these other spots. Not that they were expecting much, but yeah, it's the NBA. I mean, guys get ruled out that we're not expecting all the time. And if you can't benefit off that on a slate with no value, you're definitely going to be in a tough spot, probably playing from behind. So I want to leave as much wiggle room as I can.
I love that point. That's a great idea. Honestly, that's probably something I need to do more of, honestly, because I'm kind of one of those people where I will probably play a chalky value at the start of the slate. And normally, like, I don't know, I didn't do this yesterday. We kind of talked about it, but like
Yeah.
Gallinari and Kispert, like if people ended up on that, they didn't do well, most likely.
No.
And then just kind of recapping some of the news that we have. Kelly Oubre still out. Nothing too much there. Probably Batum getting some run. Brogdon is currently questionable. Beal's out. Walker Kessler still out. LeBron questionable. I think we expect him to play, right?
Yeah, I think LeBron plays. I mean, again, he seems to care about the play-in or whatever this tournament is, in-season tournament, more than some of the other guys. So hopefully he is on the floor. I do expect him to play. Again, he's going to be questionable every single day. But yeah, I think that's all for the news, really. Let me see. Yeah, Brogdon should be back for Portland. I know we're dealing with a lot of blowout risk in that game. I think it's a 13-point spread as things stand. But before he went down with an injury, he was consistently hitting value where he's priced. So if that game were to somehow stay close, I do think Malcolm Brogdon has sneaky upside if he does end up playing. If he's out, you can maybe go to Skylar Mays and maybe he gets blowout run. But yeah.
Do we think that we haven't projected at 29 minutes? I don't know. I'm just so like mind boggled by Malcolm Brogdon, like with the whole injury report stuff last year for the Celtics. And now this year, like obviously he was playing like 40 minutes a night, got injured. So are we going to see his minutes maybe possibly be limited like they were last year with the Celtics? Like that's my worry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fair concern. And I think if the Blazers are smart, they want Brogdon to do well and then trade him at some point this season. They have a very young team. I mean, there's really no benefit to keeping him there. They're going to be taking for picks by the end of this thing. And they do have Scoot Henderson, as bad as he's been, waiting in the wings to develop into their starting point guard. So I think they want Brogdon to look really good. And I don't know if that means him playing a lot of minutes because they do need to keep him healthy. So it's kind of like a catch-22. Like, you want him on the floor. You want him producing. You also don't want him getting hurt. And if this game were to blow out, he'd be the first guy off the floor. I mean, he is the vet here. So yeah, I don't know. I think the projection's safe around 29. We did see him play as many as 44 in an overtime game, though. So I don't know if there's any hard limit on him necessarily coming off the injury, but it is a valid concern for sure.
Okay. And then we do have a couple of questions that we'll touch on as it progresses. So like favorite plays are lower than 5%. I haven't looked at the ownership too much, so we'll kind of get into that as it progresses. And then we got a couple of thoughts for Matthias Tybalt, and then we got Jabari Walker for value. What are your kind of thoughts on those two real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I never play Tybalt because he's a defensive guy, and this is maybe a hole in my game, but more often than not, like we talk about refining process throughout the year, there's going to be games where Tybalt does really well. For me, I just never play him because he's not a guy who shoots. But if you do think this game blows out, I do think Jabari Walker is someone who's always in the rotation, and even if the game blows out, he'll probably play a full run of minutes regardless. So I like Walker, really don't like Thibault very much. That's kind of where I stand on that. I'm trying to see if there's any other guys on the bench that I'd be interested in. Because, yeah, I mean, again, we don't like to project blowouts, but if you're desperate for value, you're going to kind of build that way. I think it's okay maybe here. It's one of the best teams in the West, certainly against one of the worst. And again, Portland's banged up. So I don't like Tybalt just because he's not a guy who produces on offense more often than not. But I do like Walker as kind of a last piece. And I think whether the game's competitive or not, he should be involved, which is really what you're looking for. Like Kamara, who could probably start here, is another guy I have some interest in.
Yeah.
A lot of floor games out of him where he's on single digits, but I do think the talent's there. And then Chris Murray is another one. Really hasn't been good yet at all, but I think it'll blow out. Maybe you get to him. And again, I'm saying these guys personally, like full transparency, I probably don't play any of them other than Walker tonight. But yeah, I don't think it's insane to maybe build that way.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, my morning builds that I did, Walker was the first kind of value I put in there. Just, it's okay for now. If we find better values, the day progresses as we hope. That was kind of my thought. So we'll go on and get into the guards for today. If you guys have any questions, make sure to get those in. Barry Jones is saying LeVert did nothing the last time he played, and so that's why we probably want to play him on this slate. That's just how he works, it seems like. But yeah, he's a risk reward type of guard play / forward play. It does seem like if we are probably targeting this slate, we want to be targeting that again Indy Atlanta game, and those two top plays would be Tyrese Halliburton and also Trae Young, and then maybe possibly DeJounte Murray. Now DeJounte Murray's not pulling any chalk. Is there any logical way we get to Murray instead of Young or even Halliburton on DraftKings specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like very logical as a tournament pivot. I mean, you're getting a guy in Murray who is capable of the same ceiling as Trae Young. Earlier in the season, when Trae was kind of finding his legs, it was like Murray running the offense, putting up big scores. It seems like they've kind of flip flopped now. But I mean, if you're getting a major ownership discount and a salary discount on a player like Murray, it makes sense in tournaments, I think, to pivot. I do prefer Trae as a play. He's been super aggressive lately. But yeah, Murray makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I'd be fine playing both of them in the same lineup on DK where you could play all three. I think I'd be fine with it if you can find enough value to make it work. Murray really hasn't been as consistently hitting ceilings lately. Like we see a lot of games with like 20, 30 fantasy points, but 252 total. If they stagger some of his minutes with Trae, I think he's going to see plenty of usage here. Should get plenty of looks. So he's a really strong play, definitely.
What are your kind of thoughts on maybe potentially Jordan Clarkson as a good pivot and also a pretty high scoring game? 239. That game is about a 7.5 point spread. But he's been someone that's been crushing, seemingly gets a good matchup, and he's coming in at 8% owned on DraftKings, 20% owned on FanDuel. And if you look at Murray's higher price, Trae Young's coming in way higher owned, and Halliburton's coming in much higher owned, especially on FanDuel. So what are your kind of thoughts on maybe I guess Jordan Clarkson as a starting point or pivot? Like, kind of what are your thoughts there?
I like him a lot. It took 2 years, I think, but Clarkson's finally comfortable starting now, and he's been super productive. I think 4 or 5 consecutive games where he's over 40 fantasy points, which for him is awesome because this is generally a guy who's inconsistent. I like that he's been on the floor with Keontae George. I think they really complement each other well. So I'm going to get to some Clarkson here. I do like him a lot. Probably my favorite piece overall from that late game, like talking Lakers or Jazz, any position. I think earlier in the day we're seeing Talen Horton Tucker chalk, which to me is never a good thing. I'd rather get to Clarkson if you could find the salary. I'd even rather get to Keontae George over Horton Tucker if he's going to be super popular. We saw a huge game out of him last time out. I think it's a little bit chasey to go right back there. Yes, it's his former team. I don't really look too deeply into that. So yeah, I love Clarkson as a play. I think he's excellent at his price. And if Horton Tucker's chalk on DK, I don't think he's that popular on FanDuel. I don't really want to lean on him too much.
Yeah. I would almost rather get to Colin Sexton than I would Horton Tucker, I think. More shot attempts. Horton Tucker's kind of blocks and steals dependent. I mean, sure, he can have a good game shooting and rebounds and whatnot, but at least we can bank on Sexton getting some shot attempts up. But yeah, I like the Keontae George call a decent amount. He's like where Jordan Clarkson's probably a little bit too cheap. Keontae George might be a little bit too expensive, but we could easily get 6x out of him. And it's kind of a cheaper way to get exposure to another appealing game. Like everyone is going to prioritize that Indy Atlanta game as they should. But this is kind of a logical pivot.
Yeah, and I think it's impossible to build your whole lineup with just Indy and Atlanta. I do think this Utah-LA game is probably the second best on the slate if we're talking in terms of which games are appealing. I mean, the first two have totals sub 220, and then we're worried about the blowout for Portland and the Suns a little bit. Again, I think most of the field's going to be thinking this way, so we are going to see ownership kind of clumping up in these two games, but I think it's warranted. So I'm going to be on mostly Atlanta Indy tonight, but after that, I definitely want some Jazz and Lakers pieces. More so Utah, just because I like the prices better.
We did get some questions just about that Hawks Indy game. A couple about like 5 players from the Hawks. Is that too much? And to me, I'm like, all right, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Jalen Johnson. That's like it. That's all I want to get to. Who else would you want to get to like with those 3? Because to me, I don't see logical plays if you are playing those 3.
I mean, Capella. I mean, even playing 26 minutes a night, he's hitting value sub 6K. I do like Capella at his price, especially on DK where you're playing 2 centers if you like. And then Bogdan off the bench, I think I like a lot as well. So It feels crazy. I think in tournaments you could do it,
Hmm.
but there's really no major injury news there, so you're not getting these crazy mispricings. You're really leaning into that total. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think 4 feels better than 5, personally, and yeah, I think I'd probably pay for one of Trey or Murray. I think it's a good way to get different, but if you're going to use 17K on 2 players from the same team, I mean, it's a little
Yeah.
scary. So for me, I do like Capella. I do like Bogdan. Obviously, Johnson, Murray, Young are all good plays. Hunter's on the cusp as well. But I think 4 feels better than 5 because I really do like Halliburton on the other side if you can fit him.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't think you'd be insane for it. Definitely run it back with some Indiana if you do
Yeah.
that. But I'd recommend 4 instead of 5. And FanDuel, you're limited to 4. And my first build on FanDuel did have 4 Hawks, I will say.
See that? I guess FanDuel. Yeah, FanDuel makes a little bit more
They
sense. Like that.
cap it. Yeah, they don't let you
Yeah.
play 5, even if you
Yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah, but I think it is a little bit easier on FanDuel.
Mhm.
I will say, like, I don't know. I just think the Utah pricing is better. So, like, I might be paying up for, like, probably Halliburton, maybe Murray, and then trying to
Mhm.
get to Clarkson or maybe George for guards. Is there anyone else that you see here as, like, a very good play? Obviously, we do like Darius Garland. He gets a bump if Levert's out usage wise, and obviously and production wise as well. But is he like almost too thin, or is he a GPP only play? Obviously, he's pretty cheap on DraftKings, FanDuel, maybe a little bit too thin.
I mean, the better pivot to me off of Halliburton Young Chalk is going to be Garland, even
Hmm.
more so than Murray. But I mean, I like him a lot. It's just tough to prioritize him over those other guys. Other guys that stand out, I mean, you're getting a low-owned Scotty Barnes with guard eligibility
Yeah.
on DK. Very expensive, but certainly has upside. I mean, D'Angelo Russell's been productive in that late game. If you need some flexibility for pivots, etc., I think he makes sense. And we talked about the Levert situation. I think Max Strus becomes very, very appealing with Levert out, so definitely keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do like all those Utah guards we talked about, like Sexton playing only 25 minutes per night, but hitting value consistently. He's someone I'll mix in. Um, I mean, Cam Reddish has been okay. I'd rather play him at
Yeah.
forward than guard, though. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just like two more real quickly. Eric Gordon's coming in off of a pretty good night, but
Mhm.
that almost seems matchup based. The data doesn't like him as much today as they did previously. This game has potential blowout risk. Is he someone we'd be looking at? And then the next player I'm going to mention, OG Ananobi. Are we looking at him at all tonight at 6K? He feels a little bit too cheap, and he's coming in at low ownership.
Yeah, I do like the Anobi call if you can get to him. I mean, he's kind of priced where he should be, but at low ownership, he does have enough upside to make him a good tournament play. I wouldn't play him in low
Mhm.
risk or cash
Yeah.
type games. And then for Gordon, I mean, where he's priced, he's probably a little too cheap for his upside. But at the same time, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't expect 40 fantasy points. I'd keep an eye on ownership. I think he's
Mhm.
fine as a pivot. Same with Grayson Allen, but they're both super scoring dependent. High ceilings, low floors out of those guys with Bradley Beal out of the lineup. The usage is still going to funnel to Booker and KD. And unlike some of the other guys we're talking about, if this game were to blow out, Gordon's a seasoned vet. Allen at this point is a seasoned vet.
Mhm.
They'd be guys that aren't going to see late rotations here, where some of the guys maybe on Portland would. So I don't mind them. And if the ownership continues to plummet, like it was really high when the day started, I thought Gordon was one of the chalkier pieces. But yeah, I mean, the less they're owned, the more I like them, but they're not the first guys in my lineup by any stretch.
Mhm. We are getting just a couple like statements. Cavs game going to be low owned. Raptors game going to be low owned, as they
Mhm.
probably should be. Honestly, some of those games are blowouts, and there's just not appealing price tags. And then another question: how many low risk plays should you play in a large field GPP? That's very much night dependent, slate
Yeah.
dependent. It's so difficult to say like on a specific slate. Like yesterday, we were saying, kind of do whatever you want because the chalk that's coming in is terrible chalk, and don't eat
Yeah.
the chalk, especially value wise. Whereas, I don't know,
It
there's
depends
been
on the
every
slate.
slate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you nailed it. Essentially, it does depend on the slate. I mean, like if there's a slate where, say, like I don't know, Embiid's ruled out, like you're gonna need his backup. That's a low risk play. And then like
Mhm.
3 starters for the Celtics are out. You're gonna have to get one of their value guys. Like the slate kind of dictates how much of the chalk is good chalk. But when I don't know, like night like tonight, like all the value plays are kind of just there. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I don't think on a night like tonight you have to force that into your tournament lineups. It really depends on the slate. And yeah, I mean, just
Yeah.
kind of gauge like how many nights out of 10 is this guy going to be in the winning lineup? Like, it's kind of a weird, obtuse way to think about it, but I mean, some nights like you have to just eat all the chalk, like, and you can't really help it. And you're
Yeah.
in a situation where even in high risk contests, like you can't avoid certain things. Like, but yeah, like you said, on a night like tonight, I think what we're seeing for value chalk isn't necessarily going to be great
Yeah.
at a very high percentage. So I don't know. I'd say tonight it's lower than most nights.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. It's kind of feels like a little bit like yesterday, honestly.
Definitely.
So, moving on to forwards here, we do have LeBron as the best forward play. And then, really, I kind of want to get your thoughts on LeBron to start because he's coming in 26% owned. The last stream I was on with Chuck that had LeBron on the slate. He's a Lakers fan, obviously. I had to talk him into LeBron. I was very sad. I was surprised by that. But he's been someone that's been going off and he's playing heavy minutes. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's too cheap. That was the point I was trying to get at there. Do you think he's too cheap or do you think he's priced correctly? To me, he's this cheap because he always has the questionable tag and because of that, he's not coming in too high owned ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's about priced where he should be only because AD is even cheaper on DK.
Yeah.
And like to me, AD is more mispriced, but I don't know. I like both of them. I think they're both fine. I wouldn't want both in the lineup because we don't have the value to make that happen tonight. But I do like LeBron. I think he's a really strong play. But same with AD. And yeah, they're both easier to get to on DK, which is kind of rare. They're both cheaper over there by a good amount. So I'm with you. I do like LeBron here. I do like AD here. And looking at ownerships, I mean, it does seem like LeBron is getting some love, up around 26% now. So he's a good play. But again, if you're jamming in those guards we talked about, he's tougher to get to. But I mean, if you are pivoting off of that chalk, I do think a player like LeBron makes a lot of sense. So I wouldn't fault anyone for playing LeBron here, especially on DK.
And then I do just want to talk about the Utah bigs as well. Like it was funny. I said, I don't think Lauri Markkanen and John Collins are going to coexist too many times where they both have good games. And that happened in the last game, but we haven't really seen that too much. They are both pulling in some ownership, 23 and 15% projected ownership. This is an appealing game that we can get to. It's kind of a secondary stack and opportunity tonight, game wise. Is there one that you like better, or do you like both of them, or kind of what are your thoughts here?
I mean, it's really just a price thing that I like John Collins because Lauri's in the price range of some of those guards we just talked about. He's only a little bit cheaper than guys like LeBron, et cetera. So I think John Collins for the price, like just over 6K, is my preferred play. But it is notable. I mean, if people are looking at game logs, that game went to double overtime. Lauri and Collins had ridiculous ceiling games. Booker had a bad game, then suddenly got the value. Like, everyone in that game was going off. So I don't know that you can bank on that. For me personally, Lauri's the better player of the two, has the higher raw point total, but he's 2K more expensive. So point per dollar, I prefer Collins. If salary is not an issue, I prefer Markkanen. I think they could coexist in a matchup like this against a big team like the Lakers, pretty high total. But yeah, I think I'm going to get to Collins more. I just think the price offers more upside than what we're getting out of Lauri. Other than that last game, I mean, he's been consistently hitting value, but we haven't seen the outlier ceiling games that we were seeing out of him last season. So yeah, I prefer Collins at the two, but I think they both make sense. They're definitely in play here.
Yeah. And then we kind of mentioned we like Jalen Johnson as a decent play at his price tag, coming in as one of the pretty much the best play on the slate price wise for the forwards, and then Wagner, and then John Collins, and then really Bruce Brown, Hunter, and then all the good or the mid tier value for the Atlanta Indy game. What are your kind of quick thoughts there on Wagner as a play? I think we both said Jalen Johnson we're good with, but collect your thoughts for Wagner there.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Johnson. I think John Collins is my preferred pivot if I'm getting away from him at power forward. But Wagner's good. I mean, no one ever wants to play him, but he's priced about where he should be, so he does have some upside. And I mean, yeah, I think he's fine, like as a small forward. But yeah, I'm not like eager to play him in that first game, as I mentioned. But yeah, I do think if you're looking at ownership, I mean, he does have a similar ceiling as Johnson. And and John Collins, they're all kind of in that same range. So if you're getting a big ownership discount, I think in tournaments, if you're eating a lot of chalk from that Pacers Atlanta game, I think one way to get different would be to go maybe with Franz instead of Johnson. And I'd be comfortable with that. Like, I like Johnson a lot here, but I'd be lying if I think I don't think he's safe for 35 to 40 fantasy points. He should get there, but we have seen 4 games out of him. So, yeah, I think Wagner's a logical pivot, as is John Collins. Yeah.
He has a higher ceiling too, right? Wagner, like compared to Jalen Johnson on a per night basis, like 40, maybe 50. I don't know if he's done that this year, but we've seen it at times last year. So
yeah,
I like that as a pivot.
Yeah, he's more of an offensive player, definitely. So
yeah. And then just real quickly, there are some, I don't want to say good values, and I don't even want to say potential values, but like last player in your build, you like your build type plays. And it's going to be ugly, so prepare yourself. Dean Wade, Batum, we kind of mentioned Kamara, the Tybo we already talked about, Walker we already talked about. So like those two are, I think we'd be fine with. Probably not getting to KBD. Niang is okay. I guess, are there any of those players that maybe are sticking out to you? I named those players off because they're all about 4K, but they're all projected out like 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, I like Walker. I think he's one for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, Rui for the Lakers. I don't think you mentioned him. I don't think he's insane here. Again, wide range of outcomes, but I do trust him more than Batum or some of these other guys. Agbaji, I think, has forward eligibility. Pretty inconsistent, but when his shot's falling, he can get the value, and I do think he has a higher usage rate than a guy like Batum or Covington, someone like that. So they're all fine. I know we talked about Obi Toppin. If he's chalky, I don't think you need to get there, but he's someone I'd put in that group as like pretty decent play. Should get enough minutes. But yeah, Batum, I'm not excited to get to. Dean Wade, I'm never ever excited to get to.
I know. And even if Levert's out, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had a really nice game last time. But yeah, I still don't even want to play Dean Wade, honestly. I'd rather go Jabari Walker. I'd rather go almost anywhere else. John Isaac, you mentioned early in the show, too. I do like what he can do point per minute, so I don't know, man. I'll let other people play Dean Wade. Dean Wade beats me. Dean Wade beats me. I can live with myself.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing that because, again, we don't have great value. Yeah. We did have a question. Hey, is Maxey a good pivot? Sure. He's been playing better recently, probably a little bit too cheap, but also given his ceiling. Like if you're playing him as a pivot, you're hoping for the ceiling game. But that's the thing. He might only get 40, whereas Trae Young, DeJounte Murray in a higher scoring game, you're hoping for a higher ceiling than that. Is that kind of your thoughts too?
Yeah, but I mean, he's low owned and he has the same ceiling. So I do like Maxey as a pivot. That's a logical pivot. Shouldn't see Maxey in any cash game lineups or head-to-heads or anything like that tonight. But again, large field contest, you're trying to get a little different. I mean, we've seen the ceiling out of him, so definitely could get to some Maxey here for sure.
All right, so we'll go ahead and pivot into the center plays that we have on the slate. We kind of mentioned Anthony Davis as like a very good price tag play again. Pascal Siakam's popping up as a good play. Miles Turner, we have not mentioned Miles Turner once. He's coming in at 7.1, seemingly the 4th best center play on the slate. Not pulling in too much chalk as well. 8% owned on both sides, projected to get 27 minutes. And honestly, if he's projected to get 27 minutes, that does, at 8% ownership, that does kind of catch my eye a little bit. Or I don't know.
I mean, the issue with Turner is I don't know why his price hasn't come down. Like, he's a good play, but he's priced like a better play than he's been. Like, it feels weird. Like, you could get Evan Mobley for 600 more, and I don't know. It's rare we see Turner play 30 minutes for whatever reason. I think he's fine in tournaments, but yeah, it's just there's not much meat on the bone at that price, even in a really solid game. Obviously, he has a ton of upside, so I don't mind him as a tournament play, but I'm looking at his game log now. He hasn't played 30 minutes since October. There was one game in there.
Milwaukee.
They went to OT. Which makes sense against Giannis and Lopez. So I take that back. But yeah, I mean, Turner's fine. The price to me just feels a little inflated compared to other center plays.
Yeah. What about Jalen Smith at all at 4.2 is also center. Now, the minutes have been ugly. Again, high scoring game, maybe a way to get a cheap piece of this game. And he's not really popping up data wise, somewhat actually as a value. 9% owned.
I will see your Jalen Smith and I will raise you an Isaiah Jackson for cheaper.
Okay.
Jackson's actually been playing more minutes. It seems like they DNP one of these guys though, so you're playing pretty much Russian roulette. Like there's a chance Smith plays, there's a chance Jackson plays. I think one of them is going to be a good value play tonight.
Yeah.
Do I know which one? No. Again, we're dealing with Rick Carlisle, who is obnoxious for DFS. For those who don't know, even when he was in Dallas, just brutal. Rotations change more than anyone. We dealt with that in the front court there with Kleber and Dwight Powell for years, trying to figure out who was doing what. And yeah, now we're in a similar situation here with Indiana. So I never feel great about playing bench guys for Carlisle because he does DMP guys randomly. But I think both are fine as GPP darts. Personally, I'd just go with Jackson because the risk's a little bit less. I mean, he played the last 2 games and he's almost 1K cheaper. But yeah, I mean, there's merit to both, I think.
Yeah.
It's tough.
We did have a question about the other bigs in this game, Oganku and Capella. The question was, can you play both of them in the same lineup? And that's a fascinating question, I think, because they're both pretty cheap for the upside they could present.
Yeah, I mean, there have been games where they both get there. Unlike some other teams, these are 2 guys who generally don't share the floor. And Indiana doesn't really have a backup center. We're talking about Smith and Jackson. They're a little bit undersized, so I don't know. I like Capella at his price on both sites. I like a Kongu at his price on DK. I guess you could play both there. It would be a way to get different. Like if you're loading up on this game and want to get different, that's a way to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's few and far between that they're both going to hit a ceiling. But again, this is a record high total. So maybe we can get a little weird with it tonight. I wouldn't recommend it, but if someone feels strongly about it, I wouldn't talk you off it again. There's not a ton of great value in that 4K range. I do think Capella's like a borderline core play for me tonight on DK.
Okay.
And if I'm looking as like a last piece in to put into utility, sub 5K, I don't think Okongwu is insane. It's just, I don't know. There is some negative correlation between the two of them. But again, 252 and climbing total, I guess it might work.
I kind of find that fascinating because I think I want to get to Okonkwo a little bit more just because he's cheaper. And you definitely want to pick one of them is kind of the point here because one of them should have a good game theoretically. Especially against Atlanta, especially against Indy. So we did have another quick question just with the Utah Lakers game, Reeves or Jordan Clarkson?
Clarkson all day for me, yeah. Clarkson's been over, again, 40 fantasy points, I think 5 or 6 games in a row, just as consistent as we've seen him his entire career. So
let's just sort by value real quick. So FanDuel wise, Toppin's coming in as the best play. Then Goga's about 4th. Not too crazy there. DK value wise, kind of about the same. We didn't really mention Jakob Poeltl, who's kind of like a casually good GPP pivot off of maybe Capella, not pulling in too much ownership, 8%, 5.9 on DraftKings, does have a pretty high ceiling. Any love for him, as a potential? I don't even think we need to pivot off of Capella, though. I don't know. It's weird.
No, I mean, I'm with you. I do think Poeltl's a good play. We've seen ceiling games out of him recently. Earlier in the season, his minutes were capped when the Chua was healthy, but it seems like he's finally going to get real minutes consistently, even with the team fully healthy. So I do like Poeltl, but I do think he's more of a tournament type pivot. And I did want to bring this up. You may have done it the next minute, but we do have the revenge narrative tonight in this Portland Suns game between the 2 centers. We got Ayton and Nurkic who were swapped for one another. It's in Phoenix. Maybe Ayton really wants to go off here. I don't think it's his choice necessarily. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, there's just better options, I think, on this slate, but I figure someone was going to ask at some point. I never really bake revenge into what I'm doing on a night-to-night basis, tonight included. I don't think it's something you should do, but I mean, Nurkic does feel a little cheap.
The only time I actually do revenge narratives is like this exact situation where it's the player that just left, especially in this situation, where they're going back to the place. So he's going back to Phoenix. So I do think it's a warranted narrative tonight. I do hate when it's like a year removed and people are like, he's going against his former team, but he's
Or
playing.
he went to a better team, or like he got shipped out of a terrible market and now he's on like
he wanted to go. What do you mean?
Yeah, like he's thanking you, if anything.
Yes. But no, in this situation, he should be motivated to play well. And the biggest thing for this game for Portland, it's ugly. Again, if I was going to do 5 lineups tonight, I typically only do 4. I would put a Portland stack in there because if the game stays close, depending on the Malcolm Brogdon news, I should say, but like Grant, Ayton, and probably Sharp, those would be 2 players that could get 40 fantasy points at a cheaper price tag. And if the game stays close, which it won't, like it's a 13-point spread, but I don't mind that as like a low-owned pivot. But again, probably not going to happen. But if it did, 40 minutes for them or so, like they get heavy minutes.
Yeah, and I do want to say this. I mean, we build with logic, and like we're thinking this game probably blows out. But when you look at the ownership, the field's building the same way, and there have been situations like where the Bucks were 12-point favorites against the Hornets without LaMelo last year. The Hornets somehow won the game. I know the Celtics lost to, I think, the Thunder before they had SGA a couple years ago. I was at that game. It was hilarious. Like weird things do happen in the regular season. I'm thinking with this in-season tournament, maybe things like that are a little bit less likely, but at the same time, I mean, strange things do happen, and that's when, if you're building strange lineups in DFS, you can't climb a leaderboard. It really depends on your risk tolerance if you want to take risks like that. Like, I'm not someone who's building 150, but like, I mean, I don't know. If you have an unlimited bankroll and you really just want to try for first place and nothing else, maybe stack this game because no one else is. Like, not something I'm recommending, not something I'm doing. But I mean, what quicker way to climb a leaderboard than play all plays under 10% in a game no one thinks is going to be competitive? So again, not recommending it. Don't do it. But if you're, I don't know, you got infinite money, maybe take a few shots on it. Like the way I play, this isn't the way, but I know there are really solid players out there who just zig when everyone zags, and there's a reason the ownerships are where they're at. So you could take advantage of something like this. It's just on the road in Phoenix. More often than not, this game is going to blow out.
I'm actually just really curious here now. If Malcolm Brogdon's back, I want to see how many games were actually blowouts with him back. Memphis, 12-point game. Memphis, 2-point game. Memphis, 9-point game, or Detroit, 9-point game. So, sorry, my bad.
No, you're good. You're good. It's just funny. I mean, those are competitive games.
Basically, about 2 blowouts in the sample size.
And how many minutes did he play in those?
Well, the first game was a blowout against the Clippers, only 23 minutes in that game, Brogdon. And then from there, against Orlando, 31, Philly, 26. And then, as those recent games is when he was getting the minutes with Simons and also Scoot Henderson off the court. So it's really the last 4 games that he played or so, and none of those games were blowouts. And I'm not saying Malcolm Brogdon's a big needle mover, but he could help it stay close enough for long enough. I don't know. I think I talked myself into a 5th lineup tonight is all I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I mean, if that game stays close, it has been Brogdon. I know we've had big games at Sharp and Grant, but most of those have come with Brogdon out of the lineup. So, it's worth bringing up.
And then I don't think we have any more questions. I'm going to go ahead and plug the Discord chat real quick. So yeah, guys, as always, we like to kind of just plug the Discord chat. We're going to be going live there, maybe potentially right now. I believe Jayhawk's in there tonight. If he's not going live right now, he's going to go live in about 5 to 10 minutes, pretty much whenever we finish this video. But being there, we're going to be live until lock in there. At least one of us is in there every single night. If you guys have any questions, we'll get those answered. We'll give you guys our cash and GPP plays for both FanDuel and DraftKings. So yeah, make sure to get in there. Link to that's going to be in the description below.
Very nice.
Let me just get into our closing thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Levert's out. Someone just said in chat. I'm looking to confirm that.
Oh, man.
I mean, yeah, in which case I think you can get to Strus. I do think Garland is on that same tier now as Halliburton and Trey. So definitely mixing some Garland if you can. On DK, I think you could play with all of them much easier than you can over on FanDuel. So yeah, for me, really, what this is going to do is get me to more Max Strus. But Garland and Mobley have seen considerable boosts with Mitchell and LeVert out. So that's definitely worth mentioning. Oh, and Craig Porter.
He's in or out, or he's
I
in,
mean,
right?
he's relevant. I will say
Okay.
he's relevant now because, yeah, I think it has value, especially on DK where he's sub 4K. Regardless of how this game goes, I do think he plays around 20 minutes. And on a slate with no value, I think it makes some sense. I like Porter. I like Struce. I like Garland. I like Mobley.
Yeah, I think Porter will probably be in all my builds now. Again, I don't play that many builds, but let me just read off the production with those two off the court now, LeVert and Donovan Mitchell. So minutes wise, it's a small sample size, about 60 minutes for the top end guys, and then I'll go down to Dean Wade. He's about 6 on the list of minutes. He's at 45 minutes, so small sample size. But Struce only 16% usage rate. Again, small sample size. I don't think we care too much. 26 fantasy points per 36. Probably not big enough. And then Mobley crushes. No shock there. Craig Porter is a massive usage rate at 26%. So if he does get the minutes, he could be good. Niang is actually pretty good as well. And then Darius Garland, 32% usage rate, 43 fantasy points per 36. And the nice thing about Garland is we can probably project him to get maybe even 39 minutes in this game, given the injuries that they have now at the guard position.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. They're going to have to keep it close. Philly's been good, but
Yes.
I do think they could. So,
Well,
yeah.
even if they don't keep it close, like I think the plays are naturally going to be Garland still, and then Porter anyways. Like he's the natural value, I think, on the slate. My question to you, how high owned would he have to be to not think about him? 60%?
Garland?
No, Porter. I think he's going to be chalk. I'm going to keep refreshing. I'm going to assume his minutes are going to be projected at 26. I could be completely wrong.
I think you're going to be a little surprised. I don't think he gets over like 25, 30%.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I just think people are hesitant to play bench guys even when they're value. Like we saw with Pritchard last night. He should have been more popular than he was. So, yeah, I think I want to get to some. And the other issue, too, we're running into, especially on FanDuel, is he's point guard only. So if you're playing Porter, you can't play Garland, Halliburton, Young. Like you have to choose one of those three to go with him. So if he had shooting guard eligibility, I think it would be much higher. But again, he's taking up point guard only slots, which makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. And then just real quickly, Niang or Dean Wade, if you had to choose between one of the two.
Niang.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Low lower owned as well right now. So interesting there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. Right before we were about to be done. Good luck for Jayhawk there with that stuff.
Yeah, enjoy.
Any closing thoughts other than that for this slate?
No. I think you definitely want to key in on that Indiana Atlanta game. We got a little bit of value with Cleveland now. Utah, LA is fine, but this is the perfect size slate. I mean, I hate when we have 10, 12 gamers. Don't love the 2 gamers, even though we've been pretty successful on them recently.
Yes.
So yeah, just pick your spots. You don't have to eat all the chalk here, even with some of this value opening up. I don't think there's anything you have to be 100% on or anything like that. So pick your spots, pick the chalk you like. Don't play all the chalk, and don't be surprised if some of it busts because again, nothing feels like a lock here right now.
No, maybe just the studs for Atlanta and Indy, but other than that, it's trying to get lucky with the other pieces there for sure. That's going to be it, guys. Make sure to give it a like to the video on your way out. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to give us a subscribe as well. Be in here tomorrow. We got a massive, I believe, 14-game slate. We're going to be covering that. That'll be a fun slate for who's ever live tomorrow. Lots of fun stuff there. But yeah, we go live pretty much every single slate, and then we're in the Discord chat before lock for every single slate as well. So, make this your scheduled time to come in here, guys. Appreciate you guys being here.
Take care, everyone.